Hi everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. My name is Anna. Today I have a new story for you, called The Rooftop Hive. It's about a stressed city worker who discovers an unexpected way to slow down, and finds herself falling in love with something she once found genuinely terrifying. As always, just relax and listen, and let's begin. Emma Torres was 32 years old, working long hours as a marketing manager at a busy advertising agency downtown. Her days blurred together in a constant rush of meetings, deadlines, and notifications buzzing endlessly on her phone. She lived alone in a small apartment with a narrow balcony overlooking the city, rarely finding time to properly relax, let alone develop any meaningful hobbies outside her demanding career. Everything shifted during a weekend visit to her college friend Isabella's small farm, located a few hours outside the city. Isabella had recently taken up beekeeping as a hobby, maintaining several hives at the edge of her property, and she enthusiastically insisted on showing Emma around during her visit. Emma had always felt a deep, instinctive fear of bees, developed after being stung multiple times as a child during a family picnic. She still remembered that afternoon clearly, even decades later, sitting on a checkered blanket eating watermelon, when several bees suddenly appeared, attracted by the sweet fruit, stinging her arm and leg repeatedly before her parents could pull her away. The pain itself faded quickly, but the fear that followed lasted considerably longer, shaping her instinctive reaction to buzzing insects for the rest of her childhood and well into adulthood. The mere buzzing sound near her ear was usually enough to send her into a slight panic. She initially refused to get anywhere near Isabella's hives, watching nervously from a considerable distance as her friend calmly worked among the buzzing insects, seemingly completely unbothered. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Isabella's small farm, chickens wandering freely nearby, the peaceful countryside atmosphere feeling worlds away from Emma's usual hectic city environment, yet her attention remained fixed anxiously on the distant wooden hive boxes at the property's edge. "They're honestly not aggressive at all, unless you threaten them directly," Isabella explained patiently, noticing Emma's obvious discomfort. "Most people's fear comes from misunderstanding them completely. Come closer, just a little. I promise you're safe." Reluctantly, encouraged by Isabella's calm confidence, Emma took a few hesitant steps closer, her heart pounding rapidly. Isabella carefully opened one hive, showing Emma the intricate, orderly world inside, thousands of bees working together with remarkable precision, tending to honeycomb cells, caring for developing larvae, and communicating through complex movements Isabella described as their waggle dance. Despite her initial terror, Emma found herself unexpectedly fascinated, leaning in slightly closer to observe the organized chaos within the hive. "It's actually kind of beautiful," she admitted quietly, surprising herself with this reaction. "Most people say that eventually," Isabella said, smiling knowingly. "Once you understand what's actually happening inside, the fear usually transforms into something closer to respect, sometimes even genuine love." That weekend planted an unexpected seed in Emma's mind. Driving back to the city that Sunday evening, she found herself unable to stop thinking about the hive, researching urban beekeeping regulations on her phone during the entire train ride home, discovering, somewhat surprisingly, that keeping bees on apartment rooftops was actually legal and increasingly popular within her own city. Over the following weeks, Emma's curiosity gradually developed into serious consideration. She researched extensively online, read several beginner beekeeping books, and eventually discovered a local urban beekeeping association that offered introductory courses specifically for city residents interested in maintaining rooftop hives. She spent several evenings reading through forums where experienced urban beekeepers shared their own stories, discovering she wasn't nearly as alone in this unusual interest as she initially assumed. Many shared similar stories of overcoming childhood fears, of transforming stressful city lives through the calming, methodical rhythm of hive maintenance. One particular post, written by a beekeeper in a city much larger and busier than Emma's own, described the hobby as finally learning to slow down enough to actually notice something smaller than yourself, a phrase that stayed with Emma for days afterward, capturing something she hadn't quite been able to put into words herself. She also purchased 2 beginner guidebooks, reading them cover to cover within a single week, highlighting sections about basic hive anatomy, seasonal responsibilities, and common beginner mistakes to avoid. Though the reading alone couldn't fully replace hands-on experience, it gave Emma a foundation of vocabulary and basic understanding that made Thomas's later course considerably easier to follow. Despite her research, Emma still felt considerable hesitation about actually committing to the hobby. Her fear of bees, though somewhat softened by her experience at Isabella's farm, hadn't disappeared entirely. She mentioned her interest hesitantly to a few coworkers, most of whom reacted with a mixture of confusion and mild alarm. "You want to do what with bees, on your roof?" her coworker Daniel asked incredulously during a lunch break. "Isn't that incredibly dangerous, living right above where you sleep?" "Apparently it's much safer than people assume," Emma explained, though she still felt slightly uncertain herself. "Urban beekeepers do it successfully all over the world, in cities much bigger than ours." Despite the skepticism from colleagues, Emma decided to attend an introductory session offered by the local beekeeping association, held one Saturday morning at a community garden downtown. The session was led by an experienced beekeeper named Thomas, a retired schoolteacher who had maintained hives for over 20 years and now dedicated much of his free time teaching newcomers. Thomas's calm, patient teaching style immediately put Emma somewhat at ease. He began the session discussing bee biology and behavior in accessible, engaging detail, gradually working toward practical demonstrations using one of the community garden's own maintained hives. "Fear usually comes from unfamiliarity," Thomas told the small group of nervous beginners, echoing almost exactly what Isabella had told Emma weeks earlier. "The more you understand bees, the less frightening they become, and the more fascinating they become instead." During the practical demonstration, wearing full protective beekeeping suits provided by the association, Emma found herself standing directly beside an open hive for the first time in her life, without her friend Isabella's reassuring presence beside her. Her hands trembled slightly as Thomas guided her through carefully lifting a frame covered in bees, but remarkably, she managed to complete the task without panicking completely. "You did wonderfully," Thomas told her afterward, genuinely encouraging. Most people struggle much more during their first hands-on experience. Over the following weeks of the course, Thomas guided the small group through a comprehensive curriculum covering the essential foundations of responsible beekeeping. One session focused entirely on recognizing signs of a healthy, thriving colony versus warning signs of potential problems, teaching Emma and her classmates how to properly read the subtle clues within a hive's behavior and appearance. Another session covered seasonal responsibilities in detail, explaining how beekeeping tasks shifted considerably throughout the year, from careful spring preparations to essential winter protection measures. Emma found herself particularly fascinated by a session dedicated entirely to bee communication, learning about the famous waggle dance in far greater scientific detail than Isabella had originally explained, understanding now how worker bees precisely communicated the exact direction and distance of valuable food sources to their hivemates through this remarkably sophisticated movement pattern. "It's basically their own language," Thomas explained during that particular session. "A functioning, precise communication system, developed entirely without anything resembling a human brain. Remarkable, honestly, once you really think about it." Encouraged by this small success, Emma decided to enroll fully in the association's 8-week beginner course, meeting weekly to learn proper hive management, seasonal beekeeping responsibilities, and essential safety practices. She also began seriously researching what it would actually require to establish her own small hive on her apartment building's shared rooftop space, eventually discovering that her building's management welcomed the idea enthusiastically, having wanted to introduce more sustainable, nature-friendly initiatives to the property for some time. By the 4th week of her course, having gained considerably more confidence and practical knowledge, Emma decided to fully commit, ordering her first beehive kit and a small starter colony of bees, scheduled to arrive in early spring. The day her bees finally arrived felt simultaneously exciting and terrifying. Emma had spent the entire previous evening reviewing her installation notes repeatedly, unable to sleep properly, checking the weather forecast obsessively to ensure conditions would be calm and mild for the delicate process ahead. Thomas, generous with his time even outside official course sessions, personally helped Emma install her new colony into their rooftop hive, patiently guiding her through every careful step of the installation process. The small wooden box containing her starter colony arrived early that morning, humming quietly with the collective sound of thousands of bees inside, a sound that made Emma's stomach tighten nervously even before Thomas arrived. When he finally showed up, calm and reassuring as always, Emma felt her anxiety settle somewhat, grateful for his steady presence throughout the unfamiliar process. "Remember, slow, calm movements," Thomas reminded her repeatedly as they worked. "Bees respond to your energy. If you're calm, they'll generally remain calm too." Despite Thomas's calming presence, Emma's hands still shook considerably during the installation, though she managed to complete each step successfully under his careful guidance. When the final box was opened, allowing the bees to explore their new rooftop home for the first time, Emma watched with a mixture of pride and lingering nervousness as thousands of bees began cautiously investigating their new surroundings. "Congratulations," Thomas said warmly, removing his protective veil. "You're officially a beekeeper now." The following weeks brought a steep learning curve for Emma. She visited her rooftop hive almost daily after work, initially checking anxiously for any signs of problems, gradually developing a genuine routine and comfort around her buzzing rooftop neighbors. She kept a detailed journal, following Thomas's strong recommendation, recording her observations about hive activity, weather conditions, and any concerns that arose along the way. During her third week as a beekeeper, Emma experienced her first genuine crisis. Checking her hive one warm afternoon, she noticed unusually aggressive behavior among her bees, considerably more defensive than during previous visits. Alarmed, she immediately called Thomas for advice. "It's likely because of the approaching storm," Thomas explained calmly over the phone. "Bees often become more defensive right before significant weather changes. Completely normal, though I understand it's alarming when you're not expecting it." Reassured by Thomas's explanation, though still slightly shaken by the experience, Emma decided to postpone her hive inspection until after the storm passed, learning firsthand an important lesson about reading her bees' behavior and adjusting her own actions accordingly, rather than rigidly following a fixed schedule regardless of circumstances. As spring progressed into early summer, Emma's confidence grew steadily alongside her rooftop colony, which itself grew remarkably, the bees producing noticeably more honeycomb with each passing week. However, during a routine inspection in early June, Emma noticed something concerning while examining one of her frames closely: tiny reddish-brown specks attached to several bees, something Thomas's course had briefly covered but Emma hadn't expected to actually encounter so soon. Consulting her course materials nervously, she suspected Varroa mites, a common and potentially serious parasite capable of significantly weakening or even destroying an entire colony if left untreated. She photographed the affected bees carefully and sent the images immediately to Thomas, anxiously awaiting his response. "Good catch, and good instincts checking so carefully," Thomas replied within the hour, genuinely impressed by her attentiveness. "You're right, that's definitely Varroa. Completely manageable if addressed properly now, but ignoring it could seriously harm your colony within just a few weeks." Thomas guided Emma through an appropriate treatment plan over the following days, teaching her how to properly monitor mite levels and apply a safe, approved treatment recommended by the Beekeeping Association. The entire process required considerable patience and precise attention to detail, quite different from the excitement of her earlier hive installation, but Emma approached the challenge methodically, determined not to lose her colony after everything invested so far. Within 3 weeks, follow-up monitoring confirmed the treatment had successfully controlled the mite population, and Emma felt a genuine surge of relief and pride handling her first serious health crisis as a beekeeper. "You handled that exactly right," Thomas told her, genuinely pleased. "That's honestly one of the most important skills in beekeeping, catching problems early and responding calmly and correctly." She began noticing subtle changes in herself beyond simply gaining beekeeping knowledge. Her stress levels at work, previously a constant, exhausting presence, seemed to decrease considerably. She found herself looking forward to her quiet evening visits to the rooftop, the methodical, calming nature of hive inspections providing a genuine mental break from her otherwise hectic daily schedule. "You seem different lately," her coworker Priya observed during a team meeting in early June. "Calmer, somehow." "What changed?" "Bees, actually," Emma admitted, laughing slightly at how strange this explanation still sounded, even to herself. I started keeping bees on my roof. Priya, initially skeptical like most of Emma's colleagues, eventually asked to visit the rooftop hive herself, genuinely curious after noticing Emma's positive transformation. Standing safely at a comfortable distance while Emma demonstrated a routine inspection, Priya watched with growing fascination as Emma calmly and confidently worked among her bees, a stark contrast to the nervous, hesitant woman Priya remembered from just a few months earlier. "This is honestly amazing," Priya admitted afterward. "I never would have guessed you'd become this comfortable around them." Around midsummer, Emma faced her most significant challenge yet as a beekeeper. Her colony experienced a natural swarming event, a normal but potentially alarming process where roughly half the colony, including the original queen, suddenly leaves the hive together to establish a new colony elsewhere. Arriving home from work one afternoon, Emma discovered a massive cluster of thousands of bees hanging dramatically from a nearby tree branch on her building's rooftop garden. The sight stopped her completely in her tracks, a dense, moving mass of bees roughly the size of a basketball, clinging together in a shape she found simultaneously terrifying and strangely mesmerizing. A few of her neighbors had already noticed the unusual sight from their own balconies, several sending Emma nervous text messages asking whether everything was under control. Panic immediately gripped her, remembering none of the swarm-specific guidance from her beginner course clearly enough to feel confident handling the situation alone. She called Thomas immediately, her voice noticeably shaky. "Don't panic," Thomas reassured her calmly. "Swarming bees are actually remarkably docile, since they have no hive or resources to defend at that particular moment. I can come help you capture them properly, but honestly, you're in no immediate danger standing near them." Thomas arrived within the hour, guiding Emma step by step through the careful process of capturing the swarm, gently brushing the entire cluster into a cardboard box positioned directly beneath the branch, then carefully transferring the bees into a spare hive box, ultimately allowing Emma to keep the bees rather than losing half her colony to the surrounding neighborhood. Though thoroughly exhausted and slightly shaken afterward, Emma felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment successfully handling her first major beekeeping crisis, even if she hadn't managed it completely independently. "You handled that really well," Thomas told her afterward, genuinely impressed. "Most beginners panic considerably more than you did." "I definitely panicked," Emma said, laughing somewhat shakily. "I just hit it well over the phone." By late summer, Emma's hard work throughout the season culminated in her very first honey harvest, an eagerly anticipated milestone she had been looking forward to since first installing her colony months earlier. Thomas again generously offered his assistance, guiding her through the careful process of removing honey-filled frames, extracting the golden honey, and properly bottling it for storage. The entire harvesting process took an entire Saturday afternoon, filling Emma's small kitchen with the overwhelming, sweet smell of fresh honey as she carefully extracted it using borrowed equipment from the Beekeeping Association. Golden honey slowly spun out of the frames inside the extractor, collecting in thick, glistening streams before flowing through a fine mesh filter into a large collection bucket below. Emma couldn't resist tasting a small spoonful straight from the bucket, the rich, complex sweetness completely different from anything she had ever purchased at a grocery store, carrying subtle floral notes she guessed came from the flowering trees planted throughout her neighborhood. By evening, she had successfully filled nearly 30 small jars with rich, golden honey, produced entirely by her own rooftop colony. She arranged them carefully along her kitchen counter, admiring the warm, amber color catching the evening light through her window. "I actually did this," Emma said, staring proudly at the rows of filled jars lining her kitchen counter. "From nothing, basically, to this." She immediately called Isabella, excitedly sharing photos of her harvest, remembering gratefully how her friend's small farm visit months earlier had unknowingly started this entire unexpected journey. "I told you," Isabella said, laughing warmly over the phone. "Once you understand them properly, it's impossible not to fall in love with the whole process." Emma also brought several jars home during a visit to her parents the following weekend, curious how they would react given her childhood fear of bees, a story her mother still occasionally brought up during family gatherings. Her mother examined the jar skeptically at first, clearly still picturing her young daughter crying after that long-ago picnic sting. "You, keeping bees? Voluntarily?" her mother said, genuinely astonished. "I never thought I'd see the day." "I was terrified too, honestly, when I started," Emma admitted, smiling. "But it's completely different once you actually understand them properly." Her father, always more adventurous than her mother, asked detailed questions throughout dinner, genuinely fascinated by Emma's description of hive management and the swarm capturing experience earlier that summer. By the end of the visit, both parents had tried the honey enthusiastically, her mother admitting it tasted noticeably better than anything she typically purchased at the supermarket, and even hesitantly agreeing to visit the rooftop hive herself sometime, standing safely at a distance, of course. Inspired by her successful first season, Emma decided to share her unexpected new passion more broadly within her own community. She reached out to her apartment building's management, proposing a small educational event where residents, particularly children living in the building, could learn about bees and urban beekeeping in a safe, supervised setting. The building management enthusiastically supported the idea, and Emma organized a small rooftop event one weekend, inviting Thomas to help lead an educational session for approximately 15 curious neighbors, including several nervous children initially peering cautiously from a safe distance, exactly as Emma herself once had. Thomas brought along an observation hive with a clear glass panel, allowing visitors to safely watch the bees working inside without any risk, a teaching tool Emma hadn't previously seen during her own beginner course. Children pressed their faces close to the glass, pointing excitedly at the queen bee once Thomas helped them identify her distinctive, elongated body among the crowd of worker bees. "Why doesn't she have stripes like the others?" one boy asked curiously, studying the glass hive intently. "She has a different job," Thomas explained patiently. "She doesn't need to defend the hive or gather food, so she looks a little different from the workers who do." Watching a young girl named Sophia, no older than 8, gradually overcome her own initial fear throughout the session, eventually working up enough courage to observe the open hive closely alongside her mother, reminded Emma vividly of her own transformative experience months earlier at Isabella's farm. "Are you scared of them?" Sophia asked Emma directly during the event, her small voice filled with genuine curiosity. "I used to be terrified," Emma admitted honestly. "Completely terrified. But once you understand them, that fear usually turns into something much better." By the event's conclusion, several attending families expressed genuine interest in potentially starting their own rooftop hives, and Emma happily provided information about Thomas's beginner course, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction having potentially inspired others toward the same unexpected, transformative journey she herself had experienced. As autumn arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and preparation for winter hive maintenance, Emma reflected on her remarkable first year as an urban beekeeper. What began as a hesitant, fear-driven curiosity following a single farm visit had transformed into a genuine passion occupying a meaningful, cherished portion of her otherwise hectic city life. Her relationship with stress and anxiety, previously constant companions throughout her demanding career, had noticeably shifted throughout the year, her rooftop visits providing consistent, reliable moments of calm reflection amid otherwise chaotic daily schedules. Colleagues at work continued noticing her calmer demeanor, several eventually asking for advice about developing their own stress-relieving hobbies outside their busy careers. The following spring, Emma expanded her rooftop operation, adding a second hive with Thomas's continued mentorship and guidance, gradually transitioning from complete beginner toward genuine, confident expertise herself. Managing 2 hives simultaneously taught her valuable new lessons about comparing colony behavior side by side, noticing how each colony developed its own subtle personality and rhythm despite following the same basic biological patterns. She began occasionally assisting Thomas during his own beginner courses, sharing her personal journey with new, nervous students who reminded her vividly of her own uncertain beginnings. Standing before a new group of anxious beginners the following spring, Emma found herself genuinely enjoying the unexpected role of teacher, patiently answering the same nervous questions she herself had once asked, remembering clearly how much Thomas's patient guidance had meant to her during those early uncertain months. Fear usually comes from unfamiliarity, she found herself telling nervous newcomers, echoing Thomas's own words from her very first introductory session, now understanding their truth from genuine personal experience rather than simply repeating someone else's wisdom. Reflecting occasionally on her unexpected journey, Emma often thought back to that single, transformative weekend visiting Isabella's farm, remembering clearly her initial terror standing at a distance from those first buzzing hives. She never could have imagined, during that fearful moment, that bees would eventually become such an unexpectedly meaningful, calming presence within her otherwise hectic city life. And that's the end of today's story, The Rooftop Hive. I really love this story because it shows something meaningful. Sometimes the things that frighten us most initially hold unexpected gifts, if we're willing to approach them with curiosity instead of avoidance. Before you go, think about this. Is there something that once frightened you, that later became something you genuinely valued or even loved, once you truly understood it? Thank you so much for listening today. This has been Anna, and this is the podcast. See you in the next episode. Take care, and keep practicing your English.